Admiral, Generals, distinguished guests. It falls to me to host and introduce this part of the evening, and it's an extremely important part. And I want to begin by pointing out that this would not be possible without the various sponsors who have contributed to making the Ethics Jury Prize possible. And so you'll find this on the order of for the prize giving this evening. And I want to highlight Bill Nihoff and VFonds, who have particularly helped in sponsoring this event. I also want to thank the members of the jury, some of whom are here this evening, because they are very busy people and yet they give up the time to read the different master's theses that are submitted, and I value their contributions and I value the work that they do, and this would not be possible without their selfless commitment. Also, I'd like to thank our secretary, Ivana Gorge. She has been a wonderful asset, and again, for those of you who don't know, Ivana is amazingly efficient. And also, I'd like to thank I would also like to thank the executive of EuroISME for the way in which they enabled the jury to go about their business with a degree of autonomy and independence, and that is greatly appreciated, so thank you for that. As the head of a higher education institution in the United Kingdom and a former military officer, can I say that I've been incredibly impressed at the quality and standard of the master's theses that have been submitted for this year's prize. I read a lot of research degrees, and I work with a number of research students and doctoral students, and I think that the quality that we were asked to read this year is evidence of the standard of education that exists within military academies and places of learning across Europe. One of the things that I think is surprising, and I'm speaking from a UK perspective now, is that many UK universities do not know that the military has a university system that is the equivalent to or rivals the quality that you get in any university. And I think I want to encourage everyone here to plug the EuroISME-Prize. Give us lots of work next year. I would love the numbers to increase exponentially. I'm pleased to say there were more applicants this year than last year, and I would love to see that number increase. Please go away from this conference with a confidence to take this, plug it, and give us lots of work. I don't think we'll be disappointed in that. Now, it comes to the aspect of prize giving, and we have our two winners with us here this evening. And unfortunately, we have to make a distinction between the first prize and the second prize. And the second prize is awarded to Lieutenant Colonel David Glendenning. His institution is the Defence Academy of the United Kingdom. One of the really unique aspects, I think, and speaking personally now, of EuroISME, is that really interesting relationship between the practitioner and the professional academic. And when I read, forgive me, Colonel, but I would like to call you David. When I read David's thesis, it was obvious that what you have in this very excellent piece of work is that really interesting blend between the military practitioner who's been in combat, who's seen things at the sharp end, and yet because of the investment that each of our militaries give in preparing leaders for the future, you see the evidence of real fine academic scholarship. His master's thesis was who really sets the bearing on my moral compass, And I think anyone who's been on operational service, and many of us here will have seen operational service of combat, we know exactly what David is addressing. It is an exceptionally fine piece of work. It is thorough, and it's also challenging. What you may not know is that David is the MA to the Assistant Chief of the General Staff. That explains why he's wearing the uniform that he's wearing in this particular way. But what it illustrates is an insightful mind that's not prepared to simply just accept things as they are. His thesis pushes the boundaries, is challenging, and asks the chain of command to think seriously about how we educate for the future. But rather than go into the detail of the thesis, I'm going to invite Colonel Glendinning to come and explain the main parts of the thesis.
Well, good evening, sirs, ma'ams, ladies and gentlemen. I'll probably start by saying there's worse places to be on duty, which is very nice. Clearly, I'm very proud and very humble to have been awarded a prize this evening. And I'll probably go one further to say I feel like a complete imposter, sort of surrounded by such company. You're all at the cutting edge of either researching, dissecting, interpreting the application of military ethics. And I'm very much a simple soldier practitioner in that regard. But I'll try and overcome my imposter theory and just explain very briefly the sort of the thought processes, the motivations, and some of the conclusions of my work. Before I do, it would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to the International Society for Military Ethics in Europe for inviting me to Toledo. I think this coming together of ethicists from all backgrounds, certainly in my mind, which you'll soon discover is rather cluttered and a bit random, but certainly in my mind it forms that sort of human living bridge connecting the library in its very classical sense to the battlefield. And also before I begin, I do need to repay an intellectual debt, and that's to King's College London, who afforded me the sort of time and the space last year to study for my Masters. I got to reflect, spend time chatting to the really energetic staff there. I think David Wetham's here this evening, so thank you for that. Well, at least, yeah, thank you for listening. I'm trying to get me back on track. So I suppose I'll start by saying, well, actually, first, apparently if I go over 10 to 15 minutes, Ivana's going to be off in my head, so I'll be as brief as I can be. As a soldier with 15 years experience in the land environment, specialising in the terminal application of joint fires, and having fought on the front line in Helmand province alongside the Afghan National Army for just shy of 2 years, I'm a firm believer that human chemistry delivers battle-winning physics. And what do I mean by that? Quite simply, I think soldiering is a human endeavour, and I would contend that whilst geography isn't destiny, it is force driving. The actions in the land environment are human-centric, requiring a multi-layered target audience analysis in order to change behaviour, change perceptions, and change the narrative. I also have a firm belief that warfare is a key chain of diverse moral problems, arguably amplified in the land environment. And as an army officer, my main effort is leadership and delivery of effective leadership. So when I was given the opportunity to apply some mental resource to a Masters, I kind of instinctively knew that as one of the evergreen perennials of my chosen profession, it made sense to study something that was real, that was evolving, and that was here to stay, which landed on my research title, which Colonel Philip has already covered. So we're taught on sort of day one, week one, that the effectiveness, the operational effectiveness of the armed forces is sort of brought together by the sort of blend of the three inherently contextual components of fighting power: the moral, the physical, and the conceptual. So with that in mind, let me try and take you back in time, almost 10 years ago, to September 2008, when I deployed to Helmand province for the second time, employed as a fire support team commander, providing close support to the rifle companies of 4-2 Commando Royal Marines. From a conceptual perspective, we understood how to operate. We were extremely well versed in all the doctrine, practices and procedures that bound our professional application of joint fires. Similarly, from a physical component, we had all the necessary means to fight. Honed over a dedicated 6-month period of mission-specific training, we knew the technical limitations of all of our equipment, we knew the strengths and weaknesses of each individual member of the team. And from a moral component perspective, morale was high. We were motivated. We understood the legal framework that bound our application of joint fires, and we could recite the Army's values and standards. And I remember the sort of oft-expressed quasi-confidence building pre-deployment philosophy of, if in doubt, rely on your moral compass. If in doubt, rely on your moral compass. And I thought, simple. But I was wrong. So during a highly kinetic operational tour, it became evident that the conceptual and the physical components of fighting power continued to improve, almost unchecked. Daily patrols, multiple close-quarter firefights created a battlefield muscle memory. So as knowledge of the ground and the enemy behaviour became familiar, actions in the conceptual and the physical became instinctive. But the opposite was true for the moral component. Without positive action, morality could start to fade away. The moral component should form a set of unflinching moral armour, but seemingly the moral component was susceptible to corruption. So frustration, exhaustion, suffering heavy friendly forces casualties, and adversaries using a very different playbook can all challenge our judgment and expose the dangerous tensions between and within the competing seams of the core Army values. So I habitually replay my battlefield decisions, self-examine my leadership style, sort of critique my moral fortitude, to ask, when situated within the physical and violent and emotional realities of combat, how reliable was the bearing on my moral compass? So against the changing societal backdrop and an evolving character of the operating environment, that provided really the sort of motivations for me to embark upon my studies. And I certainly won't give you a full recital here this evening, you'll be bored to death, but I'll try to give you a very quick sort of fast-lane guided tour of the structure and then some of my initial conclusions. So I wanted to start by conducting a literature review to situate ethics-based leadership within the wider framework of values-based leadership, and then test the concept of ethical triangulation within a military context. From here I could sort of see what the British Army's counterpunch was to that changing moral background, and then to see if the education we give our officers and soldiers generates sufficient moral cohesion. I was also keen that I wanted to sort of test those ideas against other services in the public sector. So I chose to focus on public health, using the National Health Service, and policing, using the London Metropolitan Police Force. I think they're both operational and human services, and I think they both deal with complex ethical decisions on a daily basis. But most importantly, I wanted to grasp the concepts of moral autonomy and moral equality and kind of bash them together against a pretty hierarchical military command structure that doesn't necessarily always resonate with autonomy. I then wanted to overlay the evolving contemporary operating environment that we heard so much about today, and then discuss the concepts of courageous restraint and asymmetric morality to assess and revamp the educational pathway of the moral component in order to build that moral armour. Finally, and most importantly, I sort of wanted to add depth and meaning to the term moral compass within a military setting, to examine the competing responsibilities of the individual, the British Army and society in setting the bearing on my moral compass. So I'll briefly leave you with 4 conclusions and some thinking points. Okay, first, moral advantage gained through an enhanced aptitude in dealing with ethical dilemmas conveys strategic advantage. Building a moral environment that encourages reciprocal ethical behaviour should be the primary responsibility of all military leaders. We've known for quite some time that at the tactical level can have ramifications at the strategic level. But to be truly effective, I contend that we need to map the notion of the of the strategic corporal out of the physical and into the moral domains. Operating in a sort of train, advise, assist and accompany role, land forces have increased their operational footprints in recent years. And although out of contact at times, soldiers and officers will still be exposed to countercultural ideologies, behaviours and norms that will manifest as alien moral code. And I contend that introducing the term strategic moral corporal into the lexicon will reinforce the reputational dangers associated with ethical misjudgment. Okay, conclusion number 2, we're getting there, I promise. Teaching ethical leadership and ethical theory triangulation will provide a functional theoretical framework to structure the delivery of ethics education in the British Army. In 2001, Ralph Peters wrote, "Officers will always need the killer instinct, but today they also need the discipline of a saint, the insight of an anthropologist, and the acrobat's sense of balance." Now in 2007, this challenge is not contained within the officer cohort. It pervades every rank of the British Army, commissioned and non-commissioned. I think recognising the various ethical lenses that interpret dilemmas in different perspectives provides a powerful frame of reference that could be used to design an ethics educational pathway for the British Army. And I think motivating this form of ethical pluralism is a good stepping stone towards that. So we need to expand the current teaching that focuses primarily on the officer corps and pervade that down to every rank. And I believe this current educational bypass policy is long overdue. Number 3, values and standards demand an explicit foundation, ethical foundation, to ensure the training of character is married with the education of the mind. And my deduction here is really simple, that common sense doesn't always mean common practice. And then finally, number 4, I contend that the bearing on a moral compass is governed by the interplay of individual values, organisational culture, and societal norms. I think Archimedes is accredited with the quote, "Give me but a firm spot on which to stand and a lever long enough, and I shall move the earth." This can be interpreted mathematically, using a lever and a fulcrum to physically move a large object, but it can also be interpreted abstractly. To make best use of a compass, you need to know where you are and then orientate the map to the ground. To effectively use a moral compass, the same navigational principles apply. But I accept that whilst an exact ethical bearing is a misnomer, limiting the moral error and deviation may prevent you slipping into the vices that line the virtuous path. And therefore, knowing the individual error on your internal moral compass is important, especially when willful blindness, peer pressure, cultural differences, bias, anxiety, psychological safety, and fatigue all have an antagonistic relationship with ethical variance. So when it came to working out who was responsible for setting the bearing and then checking the bearing on my moral compass, I wanted to explore whether it was me, whether it was the army, or whether it was society. So using examples from the public and private sector, I explored the moral dangers of an over-reliance on any one of those factors. And it became evident that actually it was the intertwined ethical relationship between the individual, organisation and society that are mutually supporting. So as a bottom-fed, tribal, triangular organisation holding a trust and beneficiary relationship with the society that we seek to serve, individual soldiers perform extraordinary acts, often in the shadow of unlimited liability, to fulfil a team-orientated task. And I concluded that against this backdrop, the moral compass is reciprocally shaped by internal and external stimuli within a cauldron of individual interests, organisational values and societal expectations. So to finish, thank you for listening, for staying awake most of the time, for not heckling, and thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged tonight to have with us Lieutenant General Rafael Sanchez Ortega. General, sir, may I invite you to come up and award the prize to Lieutenant Colonel Friendly. Represented by Dr. David Weber. It is my great privilege to announce the winner of the first prize. And the winner this year goes to Major Elsa Verdiessen, Major in the Dutch Armed Forces. And I've the privilege of asking my friend and colleague, Lieutenant Colonel retired, Dr. Daniel Bellarmine, to come and speak on behalf of the jury and introduce our prize winner.
Colleagues, friends, and importantly, if you don't mind, I'll also call you Lisa, because Philip set the standard of, with that rank aside, and we're talking, yeah, okay, that's good stuff. First, I'll be quite honest, when I first came across your paper, I was a little bit concerned, and I had a little, I wouldn't say panic attack, but I was a bit anxious, because I saw that somewhere in the middle of the paper, many figures and tables. And then I saw that you spent some time at MIT. And then I thought, this is not going to end well, because my wife can testify that statistics, regression analysis, thank the Lord, they weren't here, was never my forte for some reason. Math, statistics, and if it weren't for my wife, I don't think I would have passed Introduction to Statistics in my BA first year. Yeah, so thank you for that. I would like to say, first of all, really that it turned out to my joy that to learn that it is possible to approach a complex subject such as agency perception and moral values related to autonomous weapons in an empirical way, but also to make it understandable for the layman, or for the, elegantly presented, where the data serve the function of explaining a qualitative point, which was the basis of Ilse's analysis. And I would like to say, regarding the literature review, just like Philip, I read a lot of papers and I read a lot of theses, and it's been a while that such a rigorous academic effort has come across my table. The depth, first of all, the scope of the literature review, I think, is outstanding. The clarity of expression and convincing the reader that, in effect, there is a knowledge gap that needs to be filled, and you made that case perfectly. The clarity of narrative and presentation, which is which many scholars fight with. I am a political scientist, and a lot of my work comes from the International Relations Political Science department. I'm not an ethicist, but a lot of the writing in my field looks like some sort of Sanskrit attempt. I don't know why people just don't say what they want to say, really. And I was happy to see that you did. Ambitious in scope, I would say, and an ambitious also in depth. Systematic, and I could actually see the blood, sweat, and tears on that paper, and it's like Hemingway said, it probably went through your head at some point or other, but for every 100 pages that are right, 99% are crap, right? And clarity of writing is a skill, right? And you mastered it fantastically. So I was really, really, really impressed with your paper, and I think that you are a highly deserving person for the prize. And thank you for contributing to the academic, ethical, and also practitioner field in such a fantastic way. Thank you very much.
Major Producer, can I invite you to come up and share with us a synopsis of your paper?
Okay, well, thank you for your kind words. I'm very honored to receive the EuroISME Thesis Award. In the next few minutes, I will highlight some key points of my research, the approach that I took, and conclude with some main results. I will not bore you to death with statistical analysis, although I really like doing them. That's something different. My interest in the ethics of autonomous weapons was sparked after I attended a summer school on responsible artificial intelligence. And I chose to conduct my master graduation project in this field. And when my supervisor, Dr. Virginia Dignam, asked me where I wanted to go, I boldly stated MIT, because it's the world's best technology university in the world. Virginia's connection with Dr. Iyad Rawan of the Scalable Corporation Group at MIT's Media Lab made it not only a dream, but also a reality. As a military officer and an engineer, I'm very interested in the use of autonomous weapons, which are weapon systems equipped with AI. In the past 5 years, a debate on the deployment of autonomous weapons is being held in society and at the Convention of Certain Conventional Weapons, or CCW, at the United Nations. In this debate, strong views and opinions are expressed. For example, the campaign to stop killer robots states, and I quote, "Allowing life or death decisions to be made by machines crosses a fundamental moral line. Autonomous robots would lack human judgment and the ability to understand context," unquote. Well, when I looked into the topic, I found that there was not much empirical research done on the topic. So I thought, okay, these are views and opinions, but how do people actually feel about them? So I found little empirical research that support these views or that provide insight into how autonomous weapons are perceived by the military. And I also found no empirical research on moral values that underline that fundamental moral line as stated by the Ban Killer Robot campaign. So this led me to conduct an empirical study to get insight in one, how autonomous weapons are being perceived by the military, and two, which moral values do people consider important when autonomous weapons are deployed in the near future, which I defined as within the next 5 years, because I want to stay away from sci-fi concepts such as Terminator or Data from Star Trek. So to study this perception, I drafted a hypothesis for which I reasoned that military personnel will view autonomous weapons as any other weapon and therefore no more than the tool to achieve an effect, instead of having agentic characteristics, which is the capability to think and act that people often describe to robots and systems with AI. So I reasoned that my military colleagues would not do that. And I started my research questioning by conducting quite a thorough literature review. And as my research combines 3 different fields, artificial intelligence, moral philosophy, and cognitive psychology, that was quite challenging because the body of knowledge in each of these fields is quite different. So in moral philosophy and cognitive psychology, the concepts are very well defined. But if you look to artificial intelligence and autonomous weapons in particular, this is not the case. And it's even so that a choice for a definition to describe autonomous weapons implies a position you take in the debate. So it's also highly politicized. I set up my research design after the literature review using the value-sensitive design method. And that's a method being used at Delft University of Technology. And it's a 3-partite approach that considers the conceptual, empirical, and technical investigation, and looks how that the whole design process is implicated by human values. And I will briefly describe my research in these three phases. So in the conceptual investigation phase, I ran a small exploratory survey to identify the values people associate with autonomous weapons, and I held 6 interviews with experts in the field, ranging from military officers, my colleagues, the Dutch MOD, to experts to artificial intelligence, and even advocates of the Bank Killer Robot campaign, because I wanted to take multiple views into account. And based on these interviews and a small survey, I selected a few values, meaning, for example, trust, human dignity, confidence, and anxiety. Although that latter is not really a retrospective value, but more an emotion. Okay. So in the second phase, and it's the empirical phase, I try to answer the research question using a quantitative survey in which I performed all the statistical analysis. And as I intended to email as an open, like snowball method, my military colleagues, I had no control of the sample size, so I had to really take care that I didn't use too many different concepts and because then I couldn't do that statistical analysis. So basically I looked at 3 different variations of the scenarios. One about an autonomous drone without the capability of agentic characters, so to think and act. The second scenario, that the drone had that capability, and the third scenario was about a human-operated drone, because I was also curious to see how current and future technology were compared, if people actually thought there was a difference or not. So the third part of the design, value-sensitive design method, is a technical investigation phase. I did not design an autonomous weapon, that's a bit going too far, but I designed a setup for a moral machine. The MIT Media Lab has crafted a moral machine for autonomous vehicles, and I created a design for autonomous weapons. I did not implement it because time was short after all the literature review and statistics. But currently a bachelor student of Delft is working on a proof of concept, and when she's done, we're going to use it to get more empirical data. So to conclude this talk, I will highlight some results of my research. And the central analysis was concerned how the agency perception of an autonomous weapon differs from that of a human-operated weapon. And my results indicate that military personnel working at the Dutch MOD attribute more agency to an autonomous weapon than a human-operated drone. Which means that I have to reject my hypothesis. So they actually see it as more as a tool to achieve an effect. They actually see it as having some capability to think and act, even though I didn't describe that in that particular scenario. Regarding the values of trust and human dignity, confidence, support and anxiety, I found that my colleagues at the Dutch MOD have more trust, confidence and support in the actions taken by a human-operated drone than those of autonomous weapons, even though the conditions and the outcome was the same. So basically they trust current technology more than future technology. They also think that a drone operated by a human being is perceived as having more respect for human dignity than an autonomous weapon, and also the outcome in the scenario was the same. And finally, autonomous weapons cause more anxiety than human-operated weapons amongst military personnel, the sample size that I found. So this result of my study substantiates some of the views and opinions which could be used to find common ground between military and societal groups in the debate on autonomous weapon. So we basically feel on some of the values, we feel the same. These 2 values, so human dignity and anxiety, are often mentioned in the discourse. So in my opinion, it would be essential to address these when debating the ethics of the deployment of autonomous weapons. So currently I'm continuing my studies on the topic in a part-time PhD at Delft University of Technology, because there are many more questions to be answered about autonomous weapons. And in my PhD I'm looking into the design of the mechanisms of human oversight and the decision-making processes of autonomous weapons. So my work is still ongoing. But for now, I want to thank you for your time and listening. And I will be more than happy to answer some questions later on if you have them. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are especially honored tonight to have with us Admiral Menendez, the Under Secretary of Defence for Political Affairs. Admiral, sir, may I invite you to come up and award our first prize winner with her award. Admiral, would you stay with me? May we have the representative of Delphi University of Technology come up and receive the plaque for the institution?